from an upstairs porch. It's comfortable in the shade. Afternoons, the birds are not so raucous as in mornings, but they surprise you. A great blue ibis bends its S-neck, dignified, slow, back and forth along the grass, in the middle of Vishram Avenue. Night drops unexpectedly. Butterflies fold up. Birds hush. Colors drain from jacaranda groves, and then you don't see jacaranda groves. The wall of insect screech begins to rise. Out of town, the black is seamless. If it's a moonless night, your headlights are the one pinprick, and the beams dwindle, leave the weight of darkness. You sense the flimsiness of man-made things. Your words space out, stop altogether. You go still, listen, strain to catch what's there. You tense to hear the motor. Use the force of all your will to keep it turning over. Someone comes to call in Buganda, which is where the Baganda live, and you don't need to strain for things to say, not like you have to in the West. The greetings are lengthy, ritualized. They don't take thinking. They take up the best part of the visit, and after the greetings you sit without a word. That portion of your visit ought to be as comfortable as the beginning because, after all, it's fundamentally what a person wants, the animal warmth of another creature nearby. At night, you want to curl up with some other body, and in the day you want a touch of company without the strain of keeping up a witty exchange. The idea is merely to take comfort in a presence now and then. But how to get that in the West? The Baganda figured it out, came up with a formula. The trouble comes when you get Westerners mixed up in the ritual. They clog machinery. Their nerves don't get it. A caller comes. The Westerner assumes he'll learn the purpose for the call. When he doesn't, he floats a question. The answer is a word, smiling but flat. He ventures another question, and the answer is a nod. He hops up for food and drink, then for something he sees to occupy his hands. At last, the rudest of the type cannot resist the insult. He attacks, he demands, "What is it you want?" The caller is confused, smiles, doesn't know the answer. She has come to pay respects. It's not clear why, if you live in Africa and leave the place, you never drop the subject. It could be nostalgia for adventure, or for sun and canna lilies all year round. But it's probable you felt more human, more connected when you lived in Africa, even when you never quite came out with that in words. The loneliness of Africa, places have their brands of loneliness, wasn't Western isolation. You had no telephone. A living person walked up to you with news. You had no television. You read and talked instead. But most of all, your house was never empty. You might, if you were single, claim you lived alone, but you'd be lying. Another person, 2 or 3, more likely, showed up on schedule. No, it isn't politic confessing that the person you knew best was the one you paid. You explain that fact away, say you were besieged, say you were forced to hire somebody. But your dreams won't keep the categories. You lived with Africans. Africans involved you willy-nilly in their lives, and your life wrapped willy-nilly around their lives. The human atmosphere was full, and decades later, it comes back as riches lost. Lighted window. At dusk, for a minute, the sky hoards light, and then abruptly you can't make out the skyline, when seconds before there were black hills against red sky. Huts are plunged in a viscous dark. But in stucco houses, the light is as blazing as sunshine. In those houses, which are new, people move in brightnesses. The houses have screen windows and lights on the verandas, and the lights draw insects, and the insects dive bomb light bulbs and thud screens. A woman is walking in the dark. She smokes a pipe. She is a barefoot countrywoman in a mud-dark dress. She stumbles on a house where the windows flame out light. She halts. Her mouth drops open. Who would dare to mock the sun? She is frightened. Obscurely she senses, if someone turns the night to day, someone will turn the day to night, and then the sky will fall. You're awed by the country when you land. First you think you're coming in across huge football fields between the hills. It takes months to learn that they're papyrus swamps. Then you can't get straight if you're in the country or a town. It looks pure country, but there are people walking on the road. The women wear reds and blues and yellows, and they sway their hips and carry jugs of water on their heads. The men brake on their bicycles and call out to the women. The air is humming with the greetings, drawn out, musical. The trees are blooming red and blue and yellow. The view is rich with every shade of green and filled with flat-topped hills. Still, vaguely, you're disturbed. It takes a while to put your finger on it, and then you see the land looks chaotic. It's not split into squares, but banana leaves flop anywhere. You can't find one straight line, and you can't see where the shambas end. It's topsy-turvy. You decide these people don't know how to take control. They don't bulldoze the hillsides or rearrange the rivers. It must be the religion, you decide. Theirs doesn't tell them they're in charge, that they must subdue what they can see. They assume, rather, that they must fit in. You are disturbed by such a passive attitude. Marriage. What goes on in a marriage? Suppose the man and the woman are both good-looking, young, bookish, and idealistic, have children, live in a place that sparks their energy. Suppose those things. And suppose, in spite of those things, they use their energy destructively. Then does one look for reasons? We're used to tracking faults, call them causes in the West. But almost any fault will do. The tools for this pursuit are blunt. So blame mothers and stepmothers, or blame the permissive 60s or the original sin, according to your ethics. It's also possible to blame the 50s, which is the time they were in college, and neither one had touched the other sex and weren't quite certain what all those parts were for. They had to marry to figure those things out. But then, if they were raised in the 60s or the 70s, you'd have to blame some opposite contingency. Anyway, most probably nothing fundamentally was wrong with either of them. One dusk, sitting on the grass with the lightning bugs, they fished airily for talk about Paul Tillich, and it felt like falling in love. The next day people thought her ditzy. She remembers, because her laugh was rippling all day long, over nothing at all. So they started going out on dates and debating the philosophies of God to entertain themselves. They married, and after they'd figured out about the body parts, the sex worked out okay. That it didn't rate the press it got was simply one of those perversities that were anchored in the heart of things, she assumed. She could compromise, and she could hope she'd change, or he'd change, or both of them would change. And suppose any explanation is a fundamental lie, because this 50s woman was not such an idiot as that. She'd halfway whispered to herself sometime before they married that she might not genuinely love this man. And that mere hint served to terrorize her, because she herself had chosen just as he had chosen, and she would never find the courage to listen to this interloper, Truth. Though, from then on out, she would somewhere know, beyond her rationalizing, that the bewilderment and anguish of their marriage grew from this one colossal cowardice of hers. But she could rationalize back then that a whole vast structure had been hammered up around them, by friends, by families, by their own heady expectations, and he provided her a place, an escape from parents who had dwindled, in her exacting eyes, to a heap of dull conventions. Everything supported their young marriage. Together they could boast of children, of friends, of work and plans and hopes. They had all they needed, and one would certainly have hoped. There are visitations stored as memories, or memories stored as visitations. It doesn't matter which. The earliest stay luminous, resurface, light other spots around the globe. You may never know the reason. In one you were swinging. Your mother was nearby. It was a sunken, soft grass patch on a mountainside, and the swing hung from a frame of rough-cut logs. On three sides of the grass was forest, but the sun got through. You were small. The swing and sunshine made you happy, and after that morning it was stuck in your head that this was what they meant when they said heaven. Thick, soft, new green grass in a circle in the forest with your mother and the sunshine and the swing. Banishing the loneliness. There's a deep loneliness in Africa. You drive, and it doesn't seem to matter. You see bush and cows and flat-topped hills and no end-break, no landmark you can make sense of. You don't know how to think about an empty vastness. You've had no initiation into the spirits of the place. Kenya now. You've read books about the Kenya highlands. You think you'll recognize the land, but you don't seem to be any longer in the tropics. The sky is banked up gray, the hills are straw, and the wind is cold. You see one figure only, a Kikuyu woman climbing a steep path. She is not the graceful, regal, strolling, hip-swaying, caryatid of the easy-living Africa you left. The ones humming out their long extended greetings. This woman is bent double. She's underneath the wood she's carrying. The wood is tied with a cord, and the cord is looped across her skull. Her forehead is corrugated ridges from the weight, and through the black-green pines behind her, the light is very weak. Reading. Communal. Solitary Africa is communal. You hear. It will work out structures that fit, that don't force Africans to counterfeit whites. Is it white or black? Or is it the climate? African houses are shelter from rain and from animals at night. Life takes place outdoors. Whites, who are living a second generation in the Kenya highlands, no longer recognize their children. New generations live outdoors. They're good at sports. They don't read. They're different kinds of people. Say they're sleep-bred English parents. Excuse me. We don't understand them, so you hear. It's striking to note the way the Scottish Highland farmers took to farming the hills of the Kenya highlands, made electricity from a rusted lawnmower motor, fitted up pumps and irrigation out of wheels from defunct wagons, and out of hubs from a burnout still, and sat on the lonesome hilltops, the craggy individualists, and happy to be that way. They'd have to be, because the land isn't rich enough to support more people per acre. It's not the skill, it's not the hard work, it's not even the reading and the know-how. It's the cultural image of the solitary person, or the lack of it, that makes the pattern unduplicatable. It's the African wanting more people around. It's some cultural assumption about how close people ought to be to each other, and how many of them ought to be close to each other. You see 10 men in the middle of the road painting a single foot of a line. It's somewhat difficult for European funders, but for being human, it's comforting, and becomes hard to do without. For blacks who leave, as well as for whites, the whites can fall into the warm, seductive rhythms and into the African spacing. Picnics. Uganda was the haven. Refugees poured across the borders from north, south, east, west to escape the Mau Mau in Kenya, and after that in waves from Congo Zaire, and barely after that in surges from Rwanda, and then from the South Sudan, and then in still more floodings from Rwanda, and from a few more Zaire Simba flare-ups. Uganda welcomed them, integrated them, gave them land, and educated them. Uganda was the pearl of peace, of dignity, prosperity. It had the ancient kingdom of Buganda, with the roots of its kingship far away in Egypt and the dynasties. The river of blood was in the South Sudan. The South Sudan was black. The North Sudan was Arab. The South attracted missionaries, a feisty wing of them who wore black ties and floor-length dresses at the dinner hour, took on the tested British mode of keeping the spirits up in undesirable climates. And with the missionaries came the churches, the hospitals, and most undermining to Khartoum, a literacy level which could one day mean power. So the North had sponged the South, obliterated anybody who could read, who owned a bike or shoes, or who could give inoculations, or merely anybody they saw. It fit the new word, genocide. But the world kept its lips tight shut. There were more vital negotiations going on with Middle Eastern peoples over Arab oil. Cathedrals. Most places in the world, most times, you are born into a religion and that's that. But you have to choose to be a priest, or a pastor, or a deacon even. And the reasons for such a choice are quite idiosyncratic. That's certainly true in the churches in the West, or in the Church of Uganda, which is the Protestant church in that country. You might hear a calling from God, or fake the calling if you like the songs and smells and vestments. You might need a job. You might feel a thirst for power or enjoy social work. Or, not too oddly with Germanic Christians particularly, the choice might come through your head, purely through thinking. You read a lot. Your favorite professor pronounces, it all boils down to God is love. You see dead ends of lives around you. You are drawn to the mystery of things. But still you need a little money every now and then. You become a teacher and decide to be a deacon on the side. The spirit of the 60s comes along and you go out to Africa, and how you fit in there with all the other brands of new convictions, which include a healthy sprinkling of the saved ones, variety of Christian, is anyone's guess. There are columns besides Main Hall at Lubega College, not columns holding up a roof, freestanding columns on a low foundation wall. The columns have no capitals. They are tall, but they simply change their minds before they get anywhere, break off at odd heights. They are vine-draped like the ruins of a temple. But there's never been a temple at La Vega, so the columns are incomprehensible. They're now the backdrop for garden parties in the country where the mountains are the mountains of the moon and the lakes and rivers are the long-sought sources of the Nile. It was Ptolemy who named the mountains of the moon, but the place's mystery was old when he named them. Solomon tracked the Queen of Sheba in this direction, and for millennia the spot was lost in mistiness. Then the English brought their engineers and artists. They told the artists, "Tell us what this means." That is, following the business of the artist is naming essences. So the artists built dream columns, because you float on dreams in this country, coming as you do from Poland or from England or from Samarkand, and you knock against the other person's dreams. The air goes loud with dreams, like the wind in eucalyptus trees. It's no use asking for motives. That would say a man could know himself, or a woman could recognize herself. Haven't philosophers and theologians and psychologists and psychiatrists tried for millennia to trace patterns, sketch maps? But they never weighed quite accurately the simple factor of getting tired of waiting, say, when a mosquito whined too long. Or it never occurred to them to measure your shabby reaction to his snigger at precisely the moment you would say your yes. And then, too, the maps they make of the psyche never print the footnotes. They don't record it was an impulse, an accident that spun you closest to nirvana when the light fell at just that slant. Great. On the search for culture. Religion runs deep in Uganda. There are more Episcopalians, if you prefer that term to Anglicans, in this small country of 8 million than there are in the whole of the United States of America, and as many Catholics and Muslims, parentheses, the British, when they had a say, outlawed the churches of the sects, that is Lutherans and Presbyterians and Methodists and such, got ecumenically dumped in with the Anglicans. But given the Bible to read on their own, one group of Ugandans uncovered what the British hid. The Jews, with their straightforward Old Testament God, were comprehensible heroes. The group would prefer to be Jews, so they established Judaism, obeyed the Talmud, and they followed it for generations now. They have invited foreign rabbis to inspect and certify. Another student, a Uganda Protestant early this century, got loose in the seminary library. He uncovered the Orthodox Church. He studied the phenomena, built his church in the Orthodox style, wore the robes, and founded, with the blessings of an Eastern patriarch, a congregation which endures. Uganda roughly marks the center of Africa, measuring both from east to west and from north to south. The northernmost border of the Bantu people crosses through Uganda. Above that border in Lango and Acholi and West Nile, you have Nilotic peoples. The tribal organization of Nilotic groups is relatively democratic. That is, the males sit around and decide things by consensus. The people display a fresh straightforwardness. The kingdoms of the south, however, Banyoro and Buganda, and further afield Rwanda, the Banyoro-Rwanda edge into Uganda, were never democratic in their structure. Theirs is a rigid hierarchy. These are the peoples that the British understood. Royalty means manners at the courtier and leads to polite duplicity. It means never disagreeing to a face, however one intends to act. Warm, agreeable politeness, good practiced politicians, But Americans have been known to be uncomfortable with the British choice, to find themselves more comfortable with the above-board peoples of the North. There are persons committed to the functional. They search for neat houses with outlets and gadgets, built-in closets and windows that shut. New constructed European houses in Africa are functional houses. And then there are the persons who blossom with the unexpectedness of things and with the simple feel and smell of things. They prefer the houses that the early Europeans built from mud in the thick-walled mud brick style. These are whitewashed inside and outside. They have big square rooms with high timbered ceilings. They have breezeways separating roofs and walls, and they have a door leading out of every room straight onto a veranda, and the veranda circles 3 sides of the house. There are no closets. There's one outlet here and there, and the wires run over the walls. These mud palaces are cool and living. Life flows in and out of their pores. They are flooded with shadowy movements, snaps and creaks and scratches and sudden gust of breeze, all unpredictable. I was at Franklin Roosevelt's side just a while before he died. He said, "One world must come out of World War II. Yankee, Russian, white or tan, Lord, a man is just a man. We're all brothers and we're only passing through." I saw Adam leave the garden with an apple in his hand. Tourists look for game parks. In Uganda, there's Murchison Falls, Queen Elizabeth, Semliki, Lake Albert, Lake George. You see elephants and crocodiles, rhino and hippopotami, baboons and lions and odd striped curly-horned deer. But amazements are closer than the game parks. On any tarmac or dirt road you see them. They aren't mere cows. They're fabulous, top-heavy beasts. Their heads hang down since they lug horns 8 feet across from tip to tip. They're useless as food. The horns take up the food. A white man is put out. Cows can be useful, he instructs. They're a way to live well, he declares. There's no sense in herding horns for the sake of herding horns. But there are values and there are values, and these are the valued cattle here. These are the ones that call out faithfulness. And anyone who sees these beasts, unless their soul is dead, feels the wonder that a soul obscurely craves. 19. On the need for a Nile hotel. The hut is a womb, a cave, a shell, a nest, a tomb. It warms, surrounds, and nourishes. Make it circular, thatch it, and its primal mother warmth. The mansion is a regal loneliness. The hut is the shape of our dreams.